All right. Welcome to the Speak Your Piece podcast. My name is Ian McNaughton. We got some special guests joining us first. Scott. Scott, how are you today?
Yeah, doing well. I'm excited. It's going to be a good pod. We got lots to talk about. Upcoming NHL season, some interesting junior players that we might see both in the NHL or even back in their own leagues. We'll have to see what happens, though, for sure.
And then also joining us today is Joshua Bell. Josh is the director of content for Eastern Canada and is a crossover scout for FC Hockey. Josh, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Oh, no worries. So Josh, just explain to the people who might not be familiar with your work, what it is that you do and kind of how you got into the industry.
All right. So I forever ago went to school for professional writing and wanted to one day kind of go into sports journalism after my hockey playing career was ended with a broken hip at just 15. Just always wanted to stay close to the game. And so tried to do that and thought it was too hard to get into, so dropped it for a while, and then was just looking for a hobby and started writing for the Hockey Writers, and started covering the Sens, and because I'm here in Ottawa, and then they were looking for people to help out with draft content for one of the drafts. I think it was the 2018 or 2019, and I was just hooked. Next year with the Hockey Writers, I went all in on draft content the full year, dropped the Sens stuff, and apparently people liked my stuff and joined FC as a scout, and now I'm their director of content. But yeah, it's kind of just started from a hobby and interest in hockey.
So how long have you been doing this for now? Like about 3 years or so?
Yeah, I started in, I think it was 2018.
Okay. And what? So it was just trying to get in, some way into hockey without playing, obviously, because you suffered a broken hip. But it was like, what made you want to get into it? Just staying with the game, keeping active.
Yeah, I was just treating it as a hobby, really, just to kind of get my voice out there. Wanted to write about hockey, and yeah, it just kind of took off from there. So I still have that mentality of treating it as a hobby, but definitely takes up more of my time now.
For sure. So we're coming less than a week after the World Juniors finale on Tuesday with the U.S. beating Canada 2-0. Any big takeaways on the World Juniors from your perspective, Josh?
It's always interesting to see all the hype Canada gets. Obviously, you want Canada to win, but if you look at the difference in the two pools, the U.S. pool was quite a bit stronger than the Canadian pool. So maybe some people saw it coming, but the majority were kind of shocked that Canada was shut out. But it's always interesting to see how the pools can impact the final.
For sure. I think another thing on that note, Josh, is that you again in the last game, you really saw how the Americans could really drive the play, and the Canadians just for whatever reason they just couldn't get it going in the game against the U.S. All the other games they had someone going, but the U.S. was really good at kind of locking up the middle, and Canada didn't have enough creative play drivers, like Zegras, a guy like Turcotte, even Caulfield, that could really push the defense back and really create that space, and that just didn't happen with the Canadians for whatever reason. But
yeah. They did the U.S. did a really good job at shutting down the Canadian guys. It was really impressive to watch, actually.
No kidding, for sure.
So I'm an American fan, Josh. If you didn't know, I'm originally from the States. I get quite a lot of hate from my Canadian friends, but just can you talk about Matthew Beniers? Just like go off for a second on him and how well he performed, because he seemed to be like one of the big bright spots for draft eligible players this upcoming season.
Oh, definitely. If out of the draft eligibles, him and Florian Elias on Team Germany are definitely the two key ones. But yeah. Beniers, so I've been watching him with Michigan this year, and he's quickly become one of my favorite prospects. He does everything so well. There's a lot of talk about Lundell last year, Anton Lundell, about his two-way play, and I think Beniers is this year's edition of that, and he might even take it to another level. His compete on the ice is just incredible. You see him forechecking hard, turning over pucks, and then all of a sudden he's the first forward back in his own end. He makes plays. He's throwing his body around. You saw him knocking down some Canadians in that final game. He plays with a fearlessness that is really impressive.
Do you think he's got more kind of skill and more dynamic aspect than Lundell does? Because you said you compared, they're pretty comparable, and I definitely agree with you there. But do you think one's better than the other in terms of like skill and dynamic play?
It's kind of hard. I mean, Lundell's playing in the Liga, right? He's and obviously he showed in the tournament that he does have that offensive skill that so many people said he didn't have last year. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think Lundell probably has a higher ceiling.
Yeah.
But Beniers might not be that far behind. It might be pretty close.
Pretty close. Cool.
Is Beniers a top 5 pick right now in your mind?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've been thinking. I wasn't sure if I was going to do rankings this year because obviously with FC we do group rankings.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about it lately, and I would honestly I might even have him top 2.
Wow.
Ooh, okay. And that must be like, just veering off a little bit. That must be like, because you're obviously a scout. Like, this is your job. This is what you do for a living. Like, I'm sure you're one of the guys who's been praising Beniers this whole season. And then when you get a major tournament like this, where a lot of eyeballs are on someone like Matthew Beniers in the World Juniors, and now everybody's talking about him, it might be. Is it a little bit frustrating, or is it kind of cool? Like, now people are kind of seeing what you're seeing to a certain extent.
Oh no, it's good. I mean, he deserves the recognition, and it's kind of good to see the widespread praise for him. No, I don't think it's too frustrating. Not everybody can watch all the games. I will note this isn't what I do for a living. This is still kind of a side hustle.
Well, I know this is what you want. I know it's what you want to do, and I know that you enjoy doing this, and you've done a great job. That's why we're having you on here, because you're like a pro in our eyes.
I appreciate that.
I think Scott has to ask you about some of the German players though, because like Scott's a German fan, but for what they had, they must have had like for losing 16-2, but then all of a sudden just keep going as they went on.
Yeah, well, I got a few questions about the German guys for sure.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, the first question I have, you mentioned Florian Elias earlier. Where do you think he's going to go in this draft? Because again, he was a top, I think, 10 scorer in the tournament. He's a very good player, really good centering Stützle and Peterka. But where do you think he's actually going to go in the draft?
I think he's probably still kind of a later round pick, just being an overager. But it is, I just had an article come out on FC Hockey this morning, actually, about kind of digging into the numbers. And Elias was actually top 10 in almost every stat. Obviously, the goals, assists, and points, but in face-offs and challenges and just making things happen, he was all over the ice. So, obviously, you think playing with Stützle and Peterka that he's kind of going to get a bump, and maybe those two carried him. But honestly, if you go back and watch a lot of it, he was forcing turnovers. He was making plays happen. He was starting in his own end, and then Stützle and Peterka would go up, but he was driving the lanes. He was kind of forcing it into the house. So it was, he's definitely not a passenger on that line. So I think he will get drafted. I hope. And like even last year playing in the DNL, the second tier German league, he led the league in goals. So he's shown that he's got some skill. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's funny you mentioned that. Like, he wasn't a passenger, and he wasn't. But again, we know that the main driver of that line was Stützle, and you're from obviously from the Ottawa area. And what are your thoughts on kind of his performance? And I mean, we knew he was that good, but like, what are your thoughts? Do you think he'll kind of do well in the NHL this year? And just speak on Stützle for some of the fans here that don't maybe know about him.
Yeah, for sure. I think he was probably a strong contender for MVP. Yeah, like if you never see guys kind of lose in the quarterfinals and win MVP, but he could have very easily been the first one to do so. But yeah, coming into Ottawa, we'll see. I think I've seen some things that he might play with a couple of vets. So obviously they'll kind of insulate him with some solid guys. I would still temper expectations. It's always hard for rookies coming into the league, and the Dell to the NHL is quite the jump. But it's definitely promising for the Senators fans here in Ottawa to see him finally wear the jersey.
For sure. Yeah, he'll be to me, he'll be one of the better players out of that draft for sure.
Oh yeah.
I don't doubt that for a second. So
yeah, there's a lot of them, I hope, but he's up there.
The 2020 draft was pretty good for sure. But yeah, we're talking about 21 draft. I also want to mention Brad Lambert, because people are thinking, okay, that's not a Finnish name, but he was obviously really good, and he's quite one of the better Finns, and he'll be back at the next year tournament for the World Juniors. So I know it's 2022, but maybe have some insight on him, and yeah.
Oh, for sure. He was probably the best 2022 eligible. And honestly, all of them were really stellar, though. I think I wrote about it yesterday. I had a column on FCSA that the 2022s outplayed the 2021s overall.
Wow.
And if you look down the list of 2022s that actually played, they all really stood out, and they were bright spots on their teams. And Brad Lambert was no different. There were times I thought he was arguably the best player on the ice. He's going to be very exciting, and I'm really excited next year to see him versus Shane Wright.
Yeah,
and
no kidding.
That's probably going to be one of the highlights in the tournament, and I'm already looking forward to it.
Right on.
So with the World Juniors, I don't want you to show your cards too much, but who is one guy that really took you by surprise, or that you were really impressed with in this tournament? If you can name one, I know it's not easy to name one, but one or two guys that really impressed you throughout this year's World Juniors.
Yeah, so the first one is, we already talked about him, but Elias. Mm-hmm. I don't think many people saw that performance coming. Another guy, and I'm going to go back to the 2022 class, is I might pronounce this name wrong, but David Jirasek, the Czech defenseman.
Yeah.
He was top 3 player on the team, but he actually was the leader of all draft eligibles in Corsi. He had something like a 68.8% positive Corsi. Like he was almost dominant when he was on the ice, and he didn't even play too much, playing on a third pairing. But he really impressed me.
Gotcha. And is there anybody who you were disappointed with, or you had kind of expected more out of these World Juniors that you're hoping can pick it up here in the either second half of whatever season we might get, or maybe they'll get it back next year in the World Juniors?
Yeah, I'll stick with draft eligibles because obviously that's kind of what I focused on. But I might pronounce this name wrong too. Daniel Chayka, the Russian defenseman.
Yeah.
Coming into this year, even, he was kind of touted as a top 15, top 20 pick maybe, or at least a first rounder. And he hasn't really done too much to impress me this year. He's played in, I think, the KHL, VHL, and the MHL in Russia. He played in the Karjala Cup for Russia, and I didn't really like his performance there. And then I don't think there's many people who will say he stood out in the World Juniors. He was even scratched for another game he played just 2 or 3 minutes. But he kind of looked a little lost out there, which is a little concerning for somebody who's gaining traction in the first round. Obviously, it's just kind of one data point, but hopefully he can turn around in the second half, especially when and if there is an OHL season. He could come back and impress, but we'll see.
Again, that reminds me of what kind of people were saying about Quinton Byfuglien as well. Like, he wasn't that impressive in the 2019 or 2020 World Juniors. He didn't play that much. But again, he got drafted quite high. So maybe he will still get drafted high. It just depends. Like you said, it's one data point. Maybe he'll have a good second half.
Yep, for sure. Still a ways away.
I want to talk about Team Sweden for a bit. And, people kind of they had a bit of tampered expectations. Their coaches a lot of their coaching staff got COVID, and some of their top center as well had COVID. And maybe just speak on Sweden, because obviously their big 54-game win streak got snapped, and they lost in the quarter to the Finns. Maybe speak on how the Swedes were as a team, and even some of their players that maybe could have performed better. Yeah, for sure. I think the COVID implications can't really be overlooked, like losing some of your coaching staff. Like you said, they lost Henriksen, their top center. They lost William Eklund, who is probably going to be one of their top players, even though he's a 21 eligible. And they kind of just couldn't go together. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge Hugo Alnefelt. I can't pronounce these names. I'm not a huge fan of his. I just don't really like his technique. And I think if they went with Jesper Wallstedt, they might have got a little better. But they just, I don't know, the team couldn't really carry it all on the backs of Raymond and Holtz. And hopefully they can kind of turn that around moving forward. They've got a pretty promising group over there for the next few years at least. So I was really impressed with Wallstedt as well. I think that's a good you mentioned that. He'll be their starter next year for sure.
Oh yeah.
But he was, when obviously Onefelt wasn't that impressive, like you said, and Wallstedt really kept them in a lot of games, which they probably shouldn't have been in.
Yeah, I mean, he played the one full game. Let in 4, but I think that was that against Russia? I might be wrong. But he played the one, and then he went in, covered for Alnefelt in the U.S. game, and shut them out.
Shut them out, yeah.
So, yeah, he looked good, which is really promising. You just look at Askarov last year at the World Juniors, kind of struggled and lost a spot, and then Wallstedt kind of steps up and maybe should have been given more chances.
Yeah.
With Wallstedt he's getting drafted this year at some point. Do you think it turns teams off? Like, because Askarov got picked, I don't think he got picked when it was the 11th, I believe, with Askarov, and 12th or 13th with Knight. Yep. Do you think with goaltenders getting higher, getting drafted higher these last couple of years, that Wallstedt will also break the top 10, barrier that we've seen with goaltenders, maybe even top 5 in some cases? Do you think Wallstedt's the guy to do that this upcoming year?
Definitely, yeah. I mentioned that Matty Beniers would probably be in my top 2, and Wallstedt would probably be the other one in my top 2 right now. I think he might be first. And it's just, so if you look at Spencer Knight, Askarov, and then Wallstedt, I think the 3 of them are kind of on the same tier. Obviously, the age difference impacts, but the 3 of them are going to be pretty close. They're kind of going to be the next Sorokin and Sheshirkin battle. But the class outside of the goaltenders is a little bit weaker in 21. And so while Knight and Askarov fell outside of the top 10 because all those strong forwards and defenders that went above them, I think Wallstedt has an interesting chance here to go higher because this class doesn't really have those potential superstars, high-end elite players that we've seen in past years.
And I think it's also dependent on what teams pick where. Because Nashville's not going to pick another. They're not going to pick Wallstedt if they happen to be in that top 5 position, or say a team like Anaheim with a young superstar goalie. Like, you're not going to go and pick Wallstedt.
Yeah, it depends because goalies they take 5-6 years sometimes.
They can, yeah.
It'll be interesting for Wallstedt because we typically don't see draft eligible goaltenders play a full season in a professional league. It doesn't happen, and he's taken over the starter role in the SHL. So it's going to be interesting. I think at the very least he'll be top 10 pick, I think.
This, just breaking off from the World Juniors a little bit, for yourself as someone who scouts hockey players, we're obviously having a weird season, to say the least, here in North America. But how much stock do you put in a North American player who hasn't had a chance to showcase himself here in North America? Like, like for someone like Chase Stillman, for example, who's he's gone off and played in Europe. How much do you put more stock, less stock in someone like that who's playing in unusual circumstances, or does it really make a difference in your eyes?
I mean, it's hard this year. Like we have the conversations internally at FC talking about how to rank players, and it's hard to rank the guys that haven't played because they've had such a long off season. Chances are they've taken big steps forward, and so you don't know how they're going to look, and so we're kind of having to go off last year's tape, which isn't really fair to kind of compare against the new guys. So it's hard. But then you look at a guy, Chase Stillman's a good example. I was watching tape on him. He's playing in the Denmark league, which is kind of a weaker league. And he's just absolutely dominant offensively, but then doesn't put any effort in defensively. So it's hard because I know that he does have some defensive ability. We saw it last year in the OHL, but he doesn't need it over there because he can win games on his own offensively. The whole game I watched, they won, I think it was like 15-2 or 3, and he had 7 points. Wow. So it's kind of hard to put too much stock into that because you want to see what he can do against a bit of better competition.
For sure. I wanted to ask you about a guy that probably could have / should have made the Canadian team, Owen Power. Because he's also draft eligible this year, correct?
He is, yeah. Yeah, it's too bad. I was hoping to see him. Obviously, it makes sense with the NCAA season. They didn't want to give him up for like 6 weeks. Yeah, he's a lot of people have him and Brant Clark top 2. I'm not sure I see Power top 2. He's definitely promising. He's got skill. He was dominant last year with the steal. I kind of question some of his defensive game. He's definitely got the offensive talent. He has flashes of defensive, but I question a little bit. Just plants his feet too much and kind of gets lost puck watching. But he's still one of the better defenders in this class, and I would have him probably top 5 still.
Do you think his kind of defensive lapses kind of chalks it up to a bit of a maturity and a bit of just like seasoning that he'll get in the NCAA, but also once he gets drafted, kind of playing with some better offensive play, like, you know, playing against better offensive guys, and maybe seeing how, like, a team, you know, if, for example, like if he gets drafted by a team like Tampa Bay, like he can watch Victor Hedman, or he can go watch Roman Josi in Nashville, like watch these guys that have been there for a while, have this upside, you know, this offensive upside, but also know how to scale it back a bit.
Yeah, and like it's hard to kind of judge a player jumping from the USHL to the NCAA, especially on defense. It takes a little bit of adjustment, and hopefully as the season goes on, he gets a little bit more comfortable, a little bit stronger in his own end, and that's probably going to come. And then, like you said, and the next step, getting drafted, he'll get better. I kind of see him more as an offensive defenseman,
right?
But he might have some of that two-way ability. We'll kind of have to see how it goes.
Who would you say his closest comparable is right now in the NHL?
That's interesting. I think Hedman's a good example that you mentioned there. I'm not sure he'll reach Hedman's level,
right?
But that kind of style of play.
Cool.
You know, your focus is on Eastern Canada with the Q and the O. We saw a bit of a Q season, and it's kind of a mix up with them. Who are some draft eligible prospects in the Q who caught your eye at least early on in the short season they've had so far?
Yeah, for sure. So the big names: Zachary Leroux, Zach Bolduc, Xavier Borgo. They're kind of coming as advertised. There's a lot of conversation about which one is the best, and I've really liked what I've seen out of Leroux. I know there are questions about his compete, which maybe we'll see him fall a little bit. So it might be Bolduc, but Borgo is strong too, but he is one of the older ones, and he's in his, I think, 3rd Q season rather than his 2nd like the others. But one guy who doesn't get a whole lot of mention is Peter Reynolds. So he's playing with the Sea Dogs. He's just a two-way force. He's really impressive. The Eastern head scout, Dylan Galloway, he hypes him up whenever he can, and he's actually working on a deep dive on him right now, so that should be up soon. But he's a guy who I think will probably squeeze into the first round. Has really stood out to me. And then another one, the next coming of Bobby Orr. He's a rookie actually in the queue, forward, and he's got that compete that he never takes his foot off the gas. He's got a nice shot. He thinks the game fast, and like it's hard. He's a rookie, so you don't have that Q season from last year to go off of, but he's coming in pretty well, and he's looked good so far.
Cool.
And then the OHL, we're hoping that starts at some point. Is there anybody that you are looking forward to, or you're anticipating watching in the upcoming OHL season?
Oh, I'm just excited for live hockey if that ever happens. Just to be at a rink. But I mean, it's kind of nice to see some of these guys overseas, like Brant Clark's in Slovakia now. Logan Milieu and Matt Maggio are overseas, and there's a few guys playing. But like obviously those top guys, I really want to see Mason McTavish this year. I'm hoping he can take a step forward. I still have him as probably one of the top 3 guys out of the O, but I want to make sure that he's still there. Brennan Othman is playing in the Swiss right now, and he looks so much better than he looked last year. So I really want to see how he does against the O guys. And then the 2 goalies, Ben Gaudreau and Tristan Lennox. There was some talk about the potential of one of them squeaking into the first round. Probably be Ben Gaudreau. But I just want to see how they've progressed.
So it sounds like there's going to be hopefully some decent talent when we get an OHL season, if we get an OHL season. So with the OHL, they talked about body checking. Are we still going to have body checking with the league coming up? Do you know for sure?
It seems like that's still a question mark, but I mean, the Leafs and the Sens are playing now. They have the high performance exception. So there's obviously going to be contact at the NHL. So I think that's probably that ship has sailed. But the biggest question will be if and when there is a season. I know the WHL just came out with the proposed 24 game season.
24 games.
So
Yep.
maybe we see something similar in a bubble. I don't know. Well, hopefully there's something. We'll see.
They could. The OHL could probably do it in divisions. Because they have a few teams in the U.S. They could have the quote U.S. division. They could have the West with London, Sarnia, Windsor, and then your Eastern teams like Kingston, Ottawa, North Bay maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully we see something.
See something.
It's going to be tough to work, especially with the numbers, COVID numbers right now. But we'll see. Safety's first, obviously, and we're seeing cases in the NHL and. Obviously, the OHL probably wouldn't have the same funding for their safety measures, so we'll see.
For sure. Yeah, Scott, do you have anything else that you want to add with Josh here before we go?
No, honestly, I had a lot of insight there, and you really gave me an insight into where some of these guys might go. I know some of the names like Walston, Veneers, Power. Some of these guys are really good. I just didn't know where you might go. It's really interesting hearing your side of it and hearing what you do. It's really cool what you do and how much you know. It's very interesting to see, and we're wishing you the best. Hopefully you keep doing well, and hopefully we'll get a season going soon.
I appreciate that.
Thanks, Josh, for coming on. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Thanks a lot for having me.